I'm going to tell you, tonight is really going to be very disorganized, just let me tell you right now. I have all sorts of notes written down on my paper, and I'm really tired, and I haven't gone over my notes, so who knows what's really going to come out today. I'm not really sure what we're talking about. I really just want to tell you 3 stories tonight and ask you 3 questions so that in your groups that you will just be diving right into telling stories. I got back from Raleigh last night. I have a real quick whirlwind trip there. We did an intentional parenting conference at the church that our church planted in Raleigh-Durham area. And actually Dom was there, and then we stole him away, and they just have a great teaching team. It's just a great church over there on the other side of, feels like the world. So if you're ever anywhere near the East Coast, there's a fabulous church for you to go to. So I really had fun there. One of the most fun things for me is that church is still really small, just really in its infancy. And we're teaching a parenting conference, and there were about 3 or 4 or 5 babies being passed around the whole time. And I could only tell the difference because a couple of them had different color hats on, and I think there were mostly girls, and there was one boy. And I just thought, this is an amazing way for a child to be raised in a church where every woman in there takes a special interest in that baby and comforts that baby. And I just loved being there. So I poured myself into the weekend, and then I got on the plane, and I thought, okay, I take my computer all the way over with me. Now I need to get ready to figure out what I'm going to teach Monday night. I just sat there and just said, Lord, I don't have a clue. I just have no idea. It feels like there's too much to cover in this last 1 week. So I just said, Lord, I have nothing to say. And within about 15 minutes after takeoff, and we're up there, I just couldn't write on my pad of paper fast enough. But it's kind of disorganized, let's put it this way today. So I really just have the 3 stories and the 3 questions, and the rest is up to you in your groups with your friends to talk over together and to decide how open and embracing you want to be with each other. I believe that each of us have stories that we need to tell, that we have a certain responsibility to be telling in our own different ways. Whether that is talking in front of a group of people, or talking one-on-one, or writing it down, or some people tell stories through their art, or their craft. Some people, Lonnie's telling stories in a sense when she sings. Some people are writing songs. Whatever way is your way, you have stories that we need to hear, because they are stories in flesh and blood, first person, how God is working in your life and the things that he is doing and the way he's intervened and the way he takes really good care of us. Each of our stories teaches us something about the one that we call our Lord, our Savior, our most intimate friend, our Father. And when you tell me your stories, I get to hear a part of the facet of who he is that I don't know, that I haven't experienced on my own. But I know you, and I care about you, so I catch your enthusiasm for how great and wonderful that he is. When we share our stories, we open our hearts at a level of intimacy that binds us together into a relationship that the Bible has a unique name for, koinonia. It's basically, we kind of put a funny churchy word for it. We call it fellowship. And some people now call it community, but community seems a little bit too loose, and fellowship sounds a little bit like a Baptist church basement, and koinonia sounds like a song from the 1970s hippie movement. But you understand what I'm saying. When you really delve into each other's lives, there's just something that happens between us that is just sort of magical. We don't have a lot in common necessarily about the way we're doing life, but we have our Lord and Father in common, and so we start to feel like family, and then we start to love each other's babies, and we pass them around, and we take care of each other. in 1 John 1. This year right now, I'm doing just a study of John's. Now, Phil will always tell you, read your Bible from beginning to end every year. And I've been on a rebellious streak for about the last 5 years, so I haven't been doing that for a while. So because I like to go slow, it's just everything about me is go slow and go deeper. And when I go all the way from Genesis to Revelation every year, I just feel like I'm not getting my questions answered. It's way too fast for me. So I'm just doing John this year. He's just so the Gospel of John and 1st and 2nd and 3rd John and Revelation is just delving in and trying to hear those words from the perspective of the John that we meet up of in the Gospels. And in 1 John, he's obviously a really relational person. 1 John 1 through 4, if you have your Bibles, go ahead and turn there. This guy wrote now at the end of his life. He's getting old by the time he wrote this. Some scholars say that he may have been as old as 100 years old, a really revered, very rare for a man to get that old, and especially having gone through what he'd been. No matter how old they figure out he is, he was old. And he says this right in the very beginning of 1 John, verse 1. That which was from the beginning, which we have heard, which we have seen with our own eyes, what we have looked at, our hands have touched, this we proclaim concerning the word of life. There it is, the components of a story: hearing, seeing, feeling. Verse 2, the life appeared. He's talking about Jesus. We have seen it and testified to it, and we proclaim to you the eternal life, which was with the Father and has appeared to us. Verse 3, we proclaim to you what we've seen and heard. That's just a really fancy way of saying we're telling you our stories. Why? So that you also may have fellowship, koinonia, with us. So, John knew exactly what we're talking about telling our stories. And then it goes on, our fellowship is with the Father. John is saying, my fellowship, my guys who are with me, our fellowship is with the Father and his Son, Jesus Christ. And verse 4, we write this to make your joy complete. And scholars cannot decide whether it really was supposed to say what he really meant, that he makes our joy complete, these people that he's writing to, or whether he meant to say that this made his own joy complete. But either way, isn't that an amazing thing to realize that when we tell each other stories, we make not only our own joy complete, but I make your joy complete, and you make my joy complete. Can you imagine what it would be like if we took this so seriously, took our stories so seriously, that we raised generations of kids, of people on our stories? Stories about how God intervened in a particular situation, how he held you through a hard situation, how he provided for you in a way that just was so amazing that could only be him. Wouldn't that be an amazing heritage? To inherit these stories from your grandma and your mom and maybe your uncles and your aunts. Not just in general terms about God, but specific, hands-on, this is the way it goes, which is why we need to be identifying and telling our stories. So tonight, story number 1. This is one of those stories that I want my grandkids and my kids to hear so often that they're tired of it, because this is a really amazing story that God did for me. The first of my stories took place when our youngest, Matt, was about 8. And he was just the cutest little kid with brown, sort of silky hair and big blue eyes and this infectious enthusiasm about people and friends, about life. I mean, he was just born having fun. And out of the blue, I thought he was just maybe growing and was getting skinny like his older brother had always been. And he did seem to really be slimming down, getting rid of all that, kind of pudgy little boy stuff. Little did I know that he was losing weight really rapidly, and I took him into the doctor because he had all of a sudden, at 8 years old, started, now, I don't know if we want to have this on the podcast, but he started wetting his bed all over again. And those of you who are moms know that at 8 years old, out of the blue, something like this is just really odd. And so I took him to the doctor thinking maybe a bladder infection or something, and we never even went home after the doctor. We went straight to the hospital, and he was admitted with type 1 diabetes, and it just took us on a railroad ride, roller coaster ride of emotion and of learning. I didn't know what it really was, and everything stopped. Just all those things that seemed so important the week before, all my to-do lists that I had to get done, it stopped. Everything stopped. While Matt was in the hospital, before he could be released to go home, I had to learn how to give shots. I tell you, that first shot I gave, I was and then I gave him the shot, and I just had to sit down for about 20 minutes of just, that adrenaline rush. But I tell you, you really get over it, because about 3 weeks later, he was wiggling when he needed one of his shots, and I remember just grabbing his arm and saying, just hold still, just giving him the shot. So my compassion didn't last as long as some of that adrenaline did. And I had to learn to prick his finger to draw blood, to test the levels of his sugar. I had to learn the difference between a high that could corrode his body, sending him into ketoacidosis and almost certain death, or lows that could send him into a coma and also almost certain death. It was just a terrifying time, just terrifying. And we were sent home with reams of material to read and to learn and to sort through, and I was just crazy scared. I just never lost that feeling of just immense fear. How could I keep my little boy safe? And then I read about this awful thing called dead in bed syndrome that is common to children with type 1 diabetes. And then I could really never sleep. So for the first 2 months, I really hardly did sleep. You're a mom. And so we put a mat down on the bed, at the foot of our bed on the floor, and he slept in a sleeping bag because we just needed to be up, and he had crazy swings of blood sugar. We needed to be testing him in the middle of the night. And Phil was at the time working for the Luis Palau Association, and most of his job was traveling. So thankfully, his boss there, his supervisor there, gave him about 2 months off so that we could just kind of figure this out and get it together before he had to do any traveling again. And so then when the morning came, when Phil had to leave on his first post-diabetes trip, it was really early in the morning when he had to leave the house, and so I sang goodbye to him. He was praying over me. Matthew was still asleep, and when he left, I just curled up in bed, went in as deep as I could, and I just put the covers up over my head, and I just cried out to God, I can't do this. I'm so scared. And there had been one crisis after another since he had been diagnosed. Here I was, functionally deaf, unable to make sense on the telephone, unable to hear at night without my hearing aids on. I had reason to be afraid. It wasn't just over-worried mama. I had a lot of reason to be afraid. So after crying out to God, I sat up in bed and I opened my Bible. And by this time, I had been learning enough about listening to just sit quietly and just to wait, just sit in my fear with him and to wait. And I took a deep breath, and I looked down at my Bible in my lap to open to where I had left off the day before, and I read these words in John 11. This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God. And my breath just caught. Could it be? Is this him? Is this the Father talking to me? I read the whole story of Lazarus over and over, wanting so much for this to be from God, but afraid really to believe it. What if I had misheard? as a hard of hearing person, I've already talked to you about a little bit about this. I know how easy it is to be sure that you hear enough stuff and your brain just comes to a conclusion. And I think we do that spiritually. So I didn't want to deceive myself. What if I'd misheard? What if this was just me wanting some sort of reassurance, me wanting to believe that Matthew's diagnosis of diabetes wouldn't lead to dead-in-bed syndrome or something awful. So I just asked him to show me if what my heart was hearing was indeed him. Was he taking this story of Lazarus, and was he giving me an assurance for Matthew? For the rest of the day, I wondered, still just really not sure, until Phil called that night at about 11 o'clock. He was in Connecticut, Hartford, Connecticut. And he was there doing a pre-trip evangelistic training. All the churches in Connecticut were meeting together in a big place kind of like this, and he was doing like a counselor training, like how to lead people to Christ and what to do and all that kind of thing. And he said something in the middle of that training about that this was his first trip and that his little boy had gotten diabetes and, would they pray for our family? Just something really minor, he thought. So when he called me at 11 o'clock that night, first he let me know that he was okay, they'd gotten there okay, that the place he was teaching, though, was pretty sketchy. It was in a bad area of town, and there had been a murder in the alley next door just a few days before, so everybody was being warned, not to go out to the parking lot by themselves and stuff like that. And it is, I've been there now, and it is a bad side of town, and just to be extra careful. Then he said, knowing nothing about my morning. Before I forget, Di, there was this African-American lady. She came up to me tonight afterwards, and she was like really nervous and uncomfortable, but actually she left the meeting, and she started to drive home, and then she came back in this dangerous parking lot that she'd been warned not to be in at 11 o'clock at night, and she came in just to find me, and she said she had a message God just wouldn't let her not give. A message for you. This is it. This sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God. I started just bawling. Poor Phil. He had no idea what I was bawling about. I was just like hyperventilating. I just couldn't believe it. When I could finally stop crying long enough to get words out, I told him just what I told you, and then he started crying. Just really, we are a family of criers, but we were really going. I don't have that woman's name. We don't know what church in the area she was a part of. No way to find out who she was, nothing. All I know is that she heard God. And even though she was embarrassed to walk up to a total stranger and give what was really just a fragment of a message that she couldn't possibly understand, she did it. She still did it. First she drove away, but then she knew she couldn't miss this. So she drove back, and she made her way through that dark, unsafe parking lot and obeyed God to my great, unbelievable blessing. Yeah. See why we need to tell our stories? Because I know you guys all have stories like that. That is what I have come to call a word from the Word. If you've been involved in the ministry to women, it's a term that we use a lot, a word, small w, from the Word, a capital W. And some people call it a word of knowledge, but I've had that. And maybe that is the correct biblical term, but I've also had that maybe misused a few times in my life, so I like just a word from the Word. So incredibly spot on for me. And so I want to tonight, in the first part, after this story, and then I have two more stories, tell you just a couple things that made this word from the Word so right for me and why it penetrated my heart so much. Number one, it was from the Word of God. Just this little snippet of a scripture came into her head and wouldn't stop, and so she passed that on to me straight out of the Bible. I was in the Word that morning. She was in the Word that morning, which made it crystal clear, miraculous even. Number 2, she was really humble and full of grace. She didn't elaborate or try to interpret what she heard from God. She didn't tell me a story to indicate that she knew something that I didn't know or anything that made me uncomfortable. Nothing weird, just a word from the Word. Number 3, she was willing, brave. She was brave. Her motive was utterly pure, and I knew it, and Phil knew it, and I felt it across whatever thousands of miles away. You know, sometimes people will say in the know kind of things about that God was speaking to them and he has a message for you, and it just doesn't feel right a lot of times. Have any of you experienced that before? It just feels a little bit uncomfortable. Not this woman. And my spirit heard the authenticity in her spirit and in the simplicity of allowing herself just to be a conduit. It wasn't about her. She was just a conduit. No attention to herself whatsoever. So that begs my first question for all of you tonight. Question number 1 is, are you willing to stay alert and available and brave and filled with grace to be willing to give a word from the Word? Because if you are, and if you will dare, and if you will listen, and if you will ask God to allow you to be a conduit like that, then there will be hundreds of those kinds of stories across our church right here, across your family, across generations. Okay, so story number 2. I'll keep this one short because I haven't been watching the countdown on the clock, so you just forgot the countdown, so I don't know what time I'm supposed to be done. So I'm just going to keep going, but I want you guys to have lots of time to talk, so I'll go fast. Okay, I'll keep this one shorter because in chapter 8 of my book, I did write about it in the chapter called Alluring Me to Listen. And this began when I was just a young pastor's wife. I was 19 when I married Phil. I was a really young pastor's wife. I didn't know up from down, and so I listened to the older pastors' wives on staff at a pretty big church that we were on staff at. And in fact, Vicki Hughes, where are you? She was at that church, taught in the school. And I was warned as a new bride that it was really almost impossible for a pastor or his wife to have close friends in the church. Not only not possible, but not advisable. There might be jealousy. Someone might get too close to you they'd be trying to get to you so that they would kind of know I don't know what they would know. And that I was told that's just the price of leadership, and I abided by that rule pretty well. I'm an introvert by nature. Yeah, I don't wake up hardly ever in the morning and just think, I just really want to go hang out with friends today. I love people when I'm with them. After I do hang out, I think, gosh, I should do that more often. But unless somebody pretty much goes after me, that I never really had, what do they call it? A felt need to just go hang out and have fun. So I actually did that so well that when Phil took a 5-week sabbatical, decades later, several years ago, after starting the church, Phil was just exhausted, and so the elders gave him a 5-week sabbatical. And on that sabbatical, we had all these chores to do, these assignments to do, and one of them is that we were supposed to line out our priorities. And so it was, have you seen that or heard about that? You take a glass, they picture a glass bowl, and you have a pile of rocks and pebbles and sand, and you have to fill it up. Anybody ever done that test? Oh, it's really great. Okay, so obviously you have to put the rocks are the most important thing, the pebbles are the next most important thing, and everything else is sand that fits around the cracks. So we were trying to figure out the rocks and the pebbles and the sand thing, and we'd spent several days on it. I'd spent several days on mine, and I was all done reading it to Phil when he pointed out that I had nothing in there about friendship. Friendships were neither rocks nor pebbles nor sand. They just were just not on my list of things to do. I was startled by that, kind of like worried, like, oh my gosh, what is wrong with me? I mean, women are supposed to have friends, right? And I had tons of friends, but they weren't a priority part of my life. Then, within about a year of that, maybe just months of that, a whole group of women went to Haiti together. There were about 20 of us, maybe a little bit more, and it was half older women and half younger women. We kind of paired up. I had been asked to speak at a leadership conference there, and I asked if I could bring a bunch of my friends. I called them my friends, but they weren't my friends, not in real honesty. They were women that I enjoyed, women that I liked, women that I thought would do this really well. I didn't even know how to have a friend. So we went to Haiti, and it was terrifying. It was right out of on the bus on the way to where we were supposed to stay. First stop, 10 minutes into Haiti, the bus was stopped, and right there, right outside my window, girls, how many of you were, I see some of my Haiti people there. Okay, good. Right out there a man was laying on the road, and I looked really close. He's dead. Dead man. It was scary in Haiti, okay? So we were scared together. We were sweaty together. We just stopped even trying with the makeup because you put it on and you just kind of watch the page come off your face, And we fell in love with these women. These Haitian women were just unbelievable, just my heroes, the bravest, most faithful, most courageous women that I know. They suffer, and every one of them has suffered in unimaginable ways, and they dance with joy and worship. And they sat there trying to get me to move my hips, and this little white church lady just couldn't dance. And it was an amazing time in Haiti. All of us grew close. Those are just the environments where there's no pretend. When I got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom one night, and there's this big thing on the floor, and I didn't bring so I found my glasses, and I put my glasses on, and the thing was a cockroach that big. So, you go through these experiences together, and you get really close. Well, when we got back, 6 of us started getting together on a pretty regular basis, and it was mostly by the initiative of one, because that's usually what it takes. And somehow, the 6 of us just bonded together. Everybody has stayed close. We feel like we're relatives with each other, family. But because one of this group just seemed to be the little mother hen who made sure that we got together, we just became what we now call the sisters. Capital S with an A at the end, because that's what they called us when the Haitian women called us over there. We all have other friends, other best friends even. But this is a circle of friends, something I have never, ever had, never knew I needed, never knew I wanted in my life. Hardly a day goes by that we aren't all 6 of us texting each other, mostly to pray. There are things that we say to each other that we don't say to anybody else. We don't share. Phil has no idea. If he goes for my phone, because sometimes in the morning it'll be ding, 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 because they're all talking to each other and answering back. He knows he's not allowed to look because it's the sisters. Sometimes if we're busy, we all know that we have permission not to respond to each other. I'll go look on there after about 15 minutes, and there's 25 or 30 messages. 6 people talking via text. They mostly talk via text, I think, instead of phone calls, because they know that I can't pick up the phone and call them. I think we all need sisters. I think we should be all aware of how much we need sisters and want sisters. I think we should be working towards getting our own group of sisters. My life is so rich and so full and so safe because of my sisters. I hear God better because of my sisters' willingness to listen to God for me and to listen to God with me. Sometimes one of us will send a prayer request for wisdom about some relationship that's hard and we're not sure how to do what we should do or how to deal with it. So we're asking for prayer, but we're also really know that we're asking for advice. And one of the sisters inevitably will text back something along the lines of, I'll spend some time praying over that for you and get back to you soon. Which is like saying, I'm going to go talk to the Father about this. And when I feel like I've heard, and they're hearing in the context of who I am. So they're not just hearing some random word, which was beautiful with the woman in Connecticut. They're hearing a word that is really, they know me well enough to know. And she does, that person will get back, and her response, because she knows me and loves me, is always spot on. Maybe not easy, but always right. So I want to talk to you tonight just a little bit about what makes a sister. And so my sisters are here. We're missing two of them. One sister has a ministry on Monday nights that is just so important and so valuable to women who have been deeply, deeply hurt. And so that's part of her story. So she's not here. Another woman lives pretty far away. So what makes a sister? They are each really loyal. Just so loyal. We have each other's backs. No one would ever so much as hint at a criticism of any of us behind our backs. No matter what we're going through, no matter how we're behaving ourselves or not, what we're doing, what we're not, I know, they are completely loyal. I'd say number two, they are faithful. As busy as we get, and we're all really busy, we are never, ever too busy to respond when one of us cries out and says, I need you, I need help, this is tough. Number three, I would say they're really accepting. It has taken me probably longer than anybody in that group to be just myself with these sisters, to just not do the pastor's wife facade, not have to feel like I have to always be up and always have to have the right answers, but just to be me. And you want to know why? Because they like me. Just as I am. It's taken me years, really, to believe it, that they would like me really honestly just as I am all the time. They accept me as I am. That right there is one of the most beautiful gifts that one woman can give to another woman. They do not require me to be a certain way. They don't act disappointed in me for who I am and who I'm not. Okay, what is that? 1, 2, 3. Number 4, they are really vulnerable, even raw sometimes. We've grieved with each other. We've grieved horrific kind of grieving with one in our group. And I love them for that rawness. I love that I'm learning to talk to them without apologizing for feeling what I feel or whatever, apologizing for not being perfect. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 5, they are so generous. These women are so generous. They're generous with their time. They're generous with their words of affection. They're generous with their prayers and with their encouragement. I never, ever, ever feel like I'm imposing on my sisters. And lastly, I would just have to say they are so fun. They are fun women. And I am so not fun. There's just nothing fun in me. About 3 years ago, my grandson Moses said to me, Amma, you are so funny. You are the funniest person I know. And all the rest of the family happened to be there, and they said, no, she's not. He hasn't said it again. My sisters invite me to just play, to not take myself so seriously all the time. They insist that I come out and play. The sisters are playing, and I have to come too, no matter how busy I am or what I ought to be doing instead. We don't play very often. We're all really busy women who are really involved in our families' lives, but we play enough that I cannot wait for the next play date. I'm here, I am 56 years old, and I'm doing play dates with these girls. Which begs the next question. Will you be a sister? Will you be willing to initiate? It has to be at least 1 or 2 or 5 of you taking some initiative. Will you look around? Will you pray? Will you ask God to give this to you? And then will you be really active? Will you take each other out for coffee? And will you, while you're having coffee together and hearing each other's stories, think, oh, I know somebody else who I think would really fit with this one? And will you just build your group of sisters? Because if you do, I tell you what, if it had been up to me, I would never have had sisters. But because they pulled me along and proved themselves to me and loved me so well, and I think you can do that too. Will you bring a circle of friends together to be fun and generous and vulnerable and accepting and faithful and loyal? If it was up to me, like I said, this never would have happened, but somebody has to have the courage and somebody has to take the initiative in order to create this circle of sisters. Okay, last story. I know these stories aren't even connected, but I wanted you to know about my sisters. Story number 3 is the story of 2 Thanksgivings. It's also, I wrote pretty thoroughly about it in the book, so I just want to talk a little bit about what I didn't write. One Thanksgiving, the first Thanksgiving was one that I'd prepared. I love Thanksgiving. I like everything about Thanksgiving. I love the meal. I love cooking for it. I love having my whole family over. I love getting everything just right, using my grandmother's old blue willow dishes, china, and kind of hodgepodge of silver. I just love Thanksgiving. And I was anticipating all the family coming over, sitting around our table and talking and laughing and loving each other. And Matt was in high school. Elizabeth was going to college locally. Bex was still living in Portland, but she was downtown living with Danny, a girlfriend. Danny is not a guy. She was not living with Danny. A girlfriend, Danny. And Jamark and Timothy were newlyweds, and they were living downtown in a little kind of a rent-controlled apartment there. And they were all coming to my house for dinner. And as you know, if you're moms, you 4 kids, and they squabble and argue their way through their childhood. So you get to this age and you realize they're kind of growing out of that, and it's amazing. You just can't quite believe they're really growing out of it. So I'm so looking forward to having them all be together and watch them tease each other and laugh. And so that's exactly what we did. Phil prayed, and everybody started talking at once, because the Comers are just unbelievable talkers and communicators. And it got louder and louder and louder. And I could not hear a thing. I just couldn't understand a word. I had no idea what they were talking about. I had no idea what they were laughing about. I had no idea if they were having fun or if they were mad at each other, except for just looking at their faces a little bit. And I sat there during that Thanksgiving. All that work, just, this is awful. I hate this. If I had had any idea how bad going deaf would be, I would have just never survived this. Sat through the whole meal just inside myself, just feeling like it's horrible. But that is what it took to propel me to get serious about overcoming my fears to have that dreaded cochlear implant surgery. If it wasn't for wanting to hear my family, I would not have done it. The risk just sounded too big to me. Remember, I told you very first one, I am a professional fearer, which means I have to find out everything that could go wrong and really examine it from every angle, and I did, and I knew them all. They would have to drill through my skull. That would come precariously close to the facial nerve that would hold up. It was being done on this side, the right side of my face. And there's no repairing that nerve once it gets severed or even damaged. So my face and my mouth would, if they had cut too close or if the nerve could get too irritated, would sag permanently. Just the thought of what that surgery would entail, with no promises. They won't give you any promises that will work for you. There's too much guesswork still involved in it. It was just for the take all those risks for the hope that it would. Just didn't make sense to me. I just thought, no way, I'm not going to do that terrible thing. Once a year, I was letting fear dominate my decision. I didn't know what to do. But after that Thanksgiving dinner, I thought, I have got to do this. This is, if I'm going to have the life I want to have, I have to do this. When I finally decided to do it, to push through that fear, to risk it so that I'd be able to hear my children, I had these warring, like fraternal twins in my head, fear of the surgery and fear of being left out of my family's life. And of course, I'm a woman, I'm a mom. I tell you what, I'd be way more fearful of being left out of my family's lives. And so God, he is so nice. Have you discovered how nice God is? I mean, I know he's loving kindness and things like that, but just nice. He does nice things to us. And he is so nice. On the morning of the surgery, I went kind of inside of myself because for me, this was brave. And I was scared and I didn't want to talk. Introverts don't talk through their fears. They just go inside of themselves. And I knew I was going to go through with this, but gosh, I was just trembling, saying as little as possible. And I was trembling, but I knew I was there because I'm going to hear my kids. I just kept telling myself, I'm doing this for my kids. I'm doing this for my kids. And just before wheeling into surgery, I mean, they'd already given me whatever that thing is that they give you that's so great, it just relaxes you. And it just, you can do whatever you want to me. Just before going in there, a nurse came in and introduced herself to Phil and I. And she'd seen my name on the board at the nurse's station. She was a recovery nurse, and she'd recognized it. She went to the church that planted this church. This all happened before we actually planted. Well, maybe a year into the plant. She'd gone to Cedar Mill, and so she'd recognized our names, and she just wanted to come in. She'd gotten herself assigned to me. This is what I say, God is so nice. And this woman was an angel in skin. She assured me that she'd be there when I woke up post-surgery, that she'd be praying. And then the last thing I remember her saying is, Diane, I'm going to take care of you. And just the peace that went over me when she said that. Do we ever grow out of this need and love of being cared for? Hers was the first face that I saw when I began to wake up after surgery, her beautiful, crinkly smile. And she put her warm palms on my cheek that wasn't covered by a bandage. And she came in and brought heated blankets, just heaped me in him. I mean, it was like being at a spa. It was amazing with her there. She was a woman sent by God in his incredible niceness to me. Another Thanksgiving rolled around just a few months after that, and I was beginning to be able to hear again. It's not like you just turn a switch on and all of a sudden you hear. It took a long time. It took months of relearning how to hear. The nerve has to be rehabilitated, and I had to relearn the sounds that things make. I mean, you just forget that things make sounds like water lapping against the edge of a pool, or rain, or your keys jingling. All the paper makes noise. Just all the things that I'd forgotten that made noise, and I had to relearn how to understand speech. The first several weeks, everybody sounded like they were one of those. We used to, when we were kids, we'd have these records, and you could make the record go faster than it was supposed to go, like Mickey Mouse. And the worship singers would be singing, and they would sound just like Mickey Mouse. Or what was that, Chickmunks? Who are those Chickmunks that sang? Is anybody from back then? So, I mean, it just definitely took a little while, but I sat at the same Thanksgiving table, made pretty much the same meals, had all the same people there with me, and I could hear. I could laugh because I understood what they were laughing about. I heard them tell their stories. I heard them talking over each other. I heard their excitement. I heard their love. I heard my family. I am so glad that I pushed through the fear and gathered the courage to do it. He will not make you do things that you're afraid of. Take it from me, a woman who has been dominated by fear too often. He will never make you do what you're afraid of. It's not his way at all. Instead, he offers invitations. Will you trust me? And there's no guarantee. He doesn't say, will you trust me to make your life just perfect and great and everything always go right and the nerve will never be hit and your face won't sag. That's not what I mean by trusting him. We just ask you, will you just trust me to just take care of you? And whatever it is that you're so afraid of, will you just trust me? What if I hadn't? What if I decided it wasn't worth the risk? That I wanted my face to stay aligned more than I wanted to hear. It's just too big of a risk. I'll tell you what, I wouldn't be here tonight. I wouldn't have even tried to write my story. My girls would probably still be living in LA, and I would never actually get to talk to them. My grandkids wouldn't share their secrets with me. My grandkids love stories, so we have this game that we call And Then. So one person starts the story, and then you get partway through the story, and then you say, and then somebody else takes the story, and we wouldn't do and then, one of my favorite things to do. Instead, I'd be happily puttering in a garden. I'd be keeping my house absolutely perfect clean, and I would have no friends. I would be living in a quietly confining prison of my own making. So my question for you tonight, will you do your hard thing? The thing that scares you, that he won't make you do? Is there something you're not doing because you're too afraid? Something you're beginning to suspect that God is inviting you to do, not making you, not demanding you, not requiring of you, something he's inviting you to do? Is there somebody you need to forgive, but that person isn't even asking for your forgiveness, doesn't think they need your forgiveness? Is there someone you need to love who has really hurt you? Do you want it bad enough? Is there something uncomfortable that will cause pain but might give you freedom if you've forgotten how to live? Do you want it bad enough? Do you want freedom bad enough to trust him and to do that thing that you're afraid of? And then there's this. Do you want to hear God bad enough to go after him, to do whatever it takes? Will you be like Jacob in his tenacity to know and experience the love of Christ? He was not going to let go. He was going to wrestle God to the ground. Bless me indeed. And God says, I'm the God of Jacob. He's my man. Will you be like him in your going after God, to refuse to let go until he's become so real to you and so present in your life that your life is really just one long talking to him and intimacy with him?